Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce a man who needs no introduction.
Yo, welcome to the Delinquent Show.
You know,
Class. So I've got a question. So
I'm surprised.
So what made you, like, you went from IWBF chairman to IPC? What made you want to take over that job? And obviously tell us about the games, the London Games as well, that you were in charge of.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. And so I've already told you that I was at war with IPC from, I would say, the very early. So I.W.B.F. established in '89, and we weren't independent from the Stoke Mandeville set up until '93. But around '92, we had this thing of wheelchair basketball going to be put in the Olympics, only 4 teams. I sent a letter objecting to Bob Stedwood about this. He replied, and at the end of his letter, I can't remember the exact words, but it was as if, well, you think you're bigger than you are, but you're not. That sort of comment.
Yeah.
So of course that would fire me up for the rest of the decade. So we were at war with the IPC, and so it comes to the first International Paralympic Committee, strategic conference review. This was in Kuala Lumpur, I think in May of 2001. And so I go along there as one of the sports, and we have 3 days of discussion. And then we come to the summing up, and they've written out on the board, on a slide, the new vision and the new mission for IPC. And we'd had really good discussion over the 3 days, I have to say that. And these two, a vision has to be short and punchy and sharp. And about 5 lines. And then there was another 5 lines for the mission. I'm about to grab hold of the microphone to say, and so somebody who I've been battling with in IPC, Hans Lindstrom, he's passed away now, he grabs it before me because he was technical officer, I think. He said, what's written up on that board, I'm sure it was written before these 3 days started. He said, you've not put anything in there that was discussed. So I grab it after him. I said, here, Hans, So this very good event ended up in, we needed maybe the UN and the diplomats to come to but we didn't have them. And so I went home and I told my wife about it. So that was May. And then the IPC elections were coming up in December, early December of that year. So I spoke with her first, because the only time I've got big decisions, I always talk to my wife, Jocelyn. And she said, well, you've got to go for it. There was no money involved. There wouldn't have been any pay or anything. And but our daughter had finished university, and Jan, our son, was at university at the time. And I think he was in his final year, possibly. 81. Yeah, maybe his final year, second year. And so we said, we've got to go for it. But then I've got to think of his Bob Price, who had been, I think, or was still chairman of the British Paralympic Association. He also wanted to stand for president. So 2 British people, that wasn't going to work, for president. You couldn't have 2 Brits going for it. So we met at a pub in Lichfield, which was maybe not quite halfway between where I lived, and he lived near Lincoln, I think. And we had a chinwag, very, very pleasurable. But I did notify him at the time. I said that, there's no money in this. And I said, it's going to be full time. It's going to be full time. You won't be able to just do it as something in your spare time, And he decided to his, and he had the backing of the what's it called? The Cabinet Office at number 10, because he worked there. So the Foreign Office would have supported him, because they didn't know me all that well, I don't think, at the time. But he decided that it wasn't going to be for him, because he needed his employment and his income. So did we, really, but we thought it was just something that had to be fixed, because they were. Well, I won't say any more about the state of IPC, but and the elections. So I was nominated by Great Britain, and we came to the elections, and in Athens at this hotel on the coast, and the day before, each of the 4 candidates, there was myself, there was Francois Terranova from France, there was Hans Lindström, who I've already mentioned, from Sweden, and a guy, then I was only 51, so I mean, I thought anybody 70 was adult, but what am I now? So an Australian, he'd been put there by Stedwood, because Stedwood tried to stay on for another 4 years. But Tony Sainsbury came in on behalf of BPA and said this is constitutionally wrong and it can't happen, and so you can't do it. And he didn't put his name forward again. Well, he couldn't. It was by the constitution you couldn't do that with IPC, because he was at the end of his 3rd 4-year term. So, and then we got this sheet of paper and it said, right, if you are fortunate and you win, you'll be invited up onto the stage by the outgoing president, who would like you to say a few nice words about him, which I would have done. I wouldn't. So, I mean, the future was the future. The past was what had gone. And also, I had to sign his certificate for the Paralympic Order, which he'd had presented to him, the gong, 2 nights before, because I don't know if I would have decided as the incoming president not to give it to him. Anyway, I went, and then you've got the vice presidents and the board to be elected, so they're all elected. I'm waiting to be invited up there, and I don't get an invitation. So he wouldn't have me up there, and he's not had his certificate signed ever to this day for the Paralympic Order. So then we had a press conference, and we got an emissary from the previous president's camp saying he'd love to attend the press conference. I'm sure they were thinking that I'd say no. And I said, oh yeah, he can come along. And I made sure that he didn't get a chance to say a word, but he was there, sat there. And so that's when it started as president of IPC, and we didn't have a good relationship with the IOC. That did deteriorate towards the end of my time as president again. But, I got on with Jacques Rogge, the then newly elected president of the IOC. He was elected in June 2001 in Moscow when I was elected in Athens. And we had to build a new organization. And it was a big thrill to do it. And we had a 13-word vision to enable para-athletes to achieve sporting excellence and inspire and excite the world. And that's what we were trying to do, along with Xavi Gonzalez and many people on the board and in the office in Bonn. So, great times.
What was it? Going back to your time before IPC and even IWBF.
Yeah.
What was the moment like when world-class funding came into the GB setup?
That was 97. And that is a very perceptive question. So we get this letter, after we'd applied for it. And the greatest thing for me was that it said, the Great Britain Wheelchair Basketball Association, the governing body, UK governing body for the sport. That was it for me, because I'd had a previous meeting when Sport England were there, and along with the forerunner of the what would it be? It would be wasn't called Sport England then, but the governmental body who dished out funding. And the funding we used to get, which was minimal, went via English basketball. And we had this meeting, and there was this guy from English basketball, and he said something which I think the guy from UK Sport or whoever it was, he thought I was going to go across the table and grab him by the throat. So he came in and he said another brilliant thing. He said, I can tell English IWBF, English Basketball Association, that if wheelchair basketball doesn't get funding via you, then you won't get any funding at all anyway, as well. And in other words, they would have dealt directly with us, but we weren't acknowledged then. So that would have been in, I don't know, early 90s. So, but to be in writing, known as the national governing body, that was it for me. And I knew that we should have been on a winner after that. Yeah. And I think we were to a degree, but but yeah. So it was a big moment.
It was a big moment because as it stands right now, looking at, we was involved in the funding at that era, 97, and we remember you had to keep receipts for where you trained, you had to keep receipts for this, receipts for that. We always kept receipts. Where now it looks like, talking about the National League here, the players that are on funding can go abroad. They're not tested. They're not hardly having GB camps, but they're getting that funding as well as playing abroad and being paid. Is that what's hurting our team? Is that what's hurting us to get to that finish line?
Well, you mean it's not as difficult or as hard as it should be, or the right sort of management isn't in place to give great encouragement, but based on the funding that they're getting nationally, you're saying that, they're not badly off, these players. And are you saying that they can be more relaxed than they need to be, or what?
That's what I think, yeah. I think, I honestly believe today's players would not live in the training sessions we had in the early 2000s. They wouldn't live with it.
Bloody hell. Because there were nothing extraordinary in the severity or the fitness levels demanded. One of my greatest achievements...
It's all right for you to say, they were for us, I'll tell you that.
No, I was the one, maybe, forcing them along. But when I came back and I played, I only played in the flipping final. I wish I'd played a bit more in Berlin for the...
93.
But in the training, those training camps we had, were you in the team then in 93 or not? I can't remember.
No, I'd only just started.
Right, yeah. So anyway, we used to go to, what's it called where you Lillyshaw. And so we'd go on a first thing in the morning. It would be pushing on a 2 or 3 miles.
The drive.
And then up the drive at the end. And so, and I'm there, and I'm 42, and there's Dan Johnson. This is. I'm sure this sickens him even as much as the wraparound that I did that he fell for, and I went on to score a basket in the Big 8. Anyway, but there we are going up this fan up the drive, and I overtake him. He must have been so pissed off, Dan. I love Dan, but he, and when you're getting into your 40s, you think, oh well, I'm still not too bad, And then we did another one when Mick McCready was in the team, and we were up in Scotland somewhere. What the hell were we doing up there? Because did we have a Scottish coach or something? I can't remember. But anyway, there we were, and there was this place was like a bloody route march, and again, a steep climb, and then you had a long downhill after it,
Yeah.
So I had a quadra where you could swap your forks just by push a button, and you could put bigger front wheels on. So Mick was pushing on his basketball chair with the little casters, and I had that size of front caster, and so going uphill, he was he was slightly faster than me, but I held him off until the top of the turn. And then, of course, with my bigger front wheels, I mean, his were wobbling like mad, going at any speed. Whew, shot down to the bottom. And, yeah, that was good fun as well. But it sounds as if I'm only a big head and I only enjoy the victories. But as a player, I always learned so much from the defeats. Yeah.
So
Well, talking about a victory, what about this victory? And I witnessed it. I was there watching because I was an older miles player. The 1994 Big 8 final. Steelers are down by 10 with 2 minutes to go. And he didn't actually show it on the footage by Channel 4. But Colin hit 3 threes in that last 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Colin Price scored 3 threes in that last 2 minutes. And obviously the game was won after it had been tied with a bomber free throw. It was won by Tony Willard's left-handed shot.
Playing there, and I remember I had a bad one of my shoulders was knackered, but at that time out, we had a timeout before full time. And what was the thing that I said to him? I said, I think we scored those in overtime to get very near, didn't we? Because
it didn't go to overtime.
Are you sure?
Yeah, the Big 8, 94, didn't go to overtime.
Okay, well, why then did I say, listen, we don't, I thought we were down. We were down by a good few points. Then Colin obviously was the scorer. Have you got that on tape?
Yeah, it's on our YouTube channel, the Big 894.
All right, well, I'll have to watch that then. But I remember Tony Woolard scoring that one at the end when we'd fought back like mad. And, but I know, I thought...
the eye opener for that was Colin scoring threes. We hadn't seen it before in the game.
Had you not? No.
And then he went 3 for 3 in the last 2 minutes.
Yeah, no, what a player. What a player. Hey, and if he'd been fit in Atlanta, you know, and he wasn't, he had a sore and all that. And they'd have beaten the Aussies, for sure. And in fact, I had Jan Berteling, one of the FIFA people. You might have heard of him, I don't know, Dutch. Yeah. And he came up to me, he was on our board, and I think we were winning by 20 points in the first half after about 10 minutes or something like that. Mark Cheney was bobbing them away, but Colin wasn't on court. He couldn't play. And then flipping, what's he called? Started opening up with the threes. Troy Sachs. Couldn't get near him. So, yeah. It sounds as if I was playing. I wasn't, but I'm replaying the flipping game in my head. So, yeah. Okay.
But that was probably, with Sachs, that was probably the greatest individual performance in a final, Paralympic final.
But could have been. I'd still go back to Haggai in 72, but they still lost to the Americans. But anyway, yeah, it was still very, very good. And the Americans. Go on.
So as president, I'm going to go back to as the IPPC president, and then we're awarded the games for London. How proud was you to be the chief in charge there? Was it a difficult process?
Well, no, it wasn't a difficult process because I was an IOC member, so I couldn't vote for the UK. You know, in the voting that took place in Singapore in 2005, and I think, well, I don't think it's ever been written about, but the tactics that were employed to try and get Madrid elected rather than London were a bit tasty, but it didn't work out in the end, because if Paris had been knocked out in what would have been the second or third round, then it would have left Madrid against London. And the thinking was, by the people who wanted Madrid to win, that all the votes that had been cast for Paris would come to Madrid. But when it was Madrid that went out, I think the votes that have been cast for Madrid were split between London and Paris, and London won. But we had some fun because I was an IOC member, not because I was president of IPC. I was put on the board, so I was on the board for 7 years, going up to the games, and that was great to be alongside Seb Cole and I'm forgetting the names, and the other two most senior people on the organising committee. That shows my age. Happens on Pointless as well, by the way. Anyway, that doesn't matter. But it was, and of course, the Princess Royal, who I knew a little bit, she was also on the board because she was an IOC member, and so it was because you can have fun anywhere. And in one or two of those board meetings, we had some fun, and then we had some very serious stuff to solve, like. There just weren't enough professional security people in the whole of the UK for what London required, and so that had to be sorted out. And then the armed forces were brought in to do part of that. But what was the big change for Paralympics? I think one of the there were several big changes, but one was the London Organising Committee for the Olympics and Paralympic Games 2012 would not allow a sponsor to come on board just for the Olympics. It had to be for both. And if it wasn't, you weren't coming on board, which was a major, major first, for the Paralympic. Yeah. And what was the other big thing? The other big thing was Channel 4, because the BBC had put so much money into the Olympics, and I'm letting them off lightly when I give this as the excuse, but they'd done some coverage of past Paralympic games, but their heart wasn't in it like it was for the Olympics, I don't think. But you get young Channel 4 coming along, and immediately I liked them. They were about new ideas, letting the athletes speak for themselves, former athlete and athlete commentators, all this sort of thing. And they transformed the Paralympic Games. I know it was in London, but they transformed the presentation. I think it was fantastic coverage, and they've continued with it.
Yeah, they are.
I argued with them on, but I lost that argument, was that Paralympians are not superhuman. They're just split the word, humans. But they're not superhuman. If we're superhuman, what's the point, Because we can do it without any training or anything, And I didn't think we wanted to be called superhuman. So, but anyway, I lost that argument, and then you got those dramatic adverts that they put on. But the best thing for me, and I've got the original artwork, they presented it to me after the games, Channel 4, for massive black posters. I don't know if the writing must have been in white, and they only said, and one was put right outside the Olympic Stadium with about 4 days to go to the end of the Olympic Games. So every day that Jacques Rogge came out of the stadium, say, thanks for the warm-up. So cheeky, that I mean, and that's the other thing I really liked about it. And they came up with that, but they told me, they got because it wasn't IPC that gave them the contract; it was the organising committee for the games. So it was Seb Coe and his team that gave them the contract. But they said to me, because I had a meeting with them pretty quickly after it was awarded, and they said, they said, we sat down on Monday morning, 3 of us in an office, and they said, what do we do now? And that was 2 years out from the game. So they hadn't worked it all out, of course, but they worked it all out as the games approached, and we're fantastic. Yeah. So I really loved it. I loved the atmosphere, in the stadium and in the park. I mean, I couldn't go across the park because I'd never make it. I'd be stopped So I had to go around in a car normally. But once we went across the park, it was unbelievable. Like, there must have been like 200,000 people in there. And all excited, all loving it, all loving Paralympic sport and the whole experience. And I thought, oh, we've made it. I mean, and if you look at the Summer Games, because I think the Summer Games are more important from an exposure point of view, if I can put it that way. I don't like saying that because of the winter sports nations. But if you look at Beijing, that's where really we took off. In 2008, they were unbelievable games, and that was after a meeting I had with the Chinese premier in one of the great halls of people on Tiananmen Square, and it should have lasted for 15 minutes. Very nice meeting you and all this jazz, and we just spoke about for 45 minutes, him and me, with two translators behind the big floral, all the flowers behind us. And he'd speak for a minute, I'd speak back for maybe a minute and a half, he'd come back with 2 minutes, and it was all about what sport can do for society. Yeah. And that was in November 2005, and really those games weren't going anywhere at that time. And then in February 2006, Hu Jintao, the president, declared games of equal splendor, and we took off like a space rocket. So you had Beijing, you had London, which was, I have to say, the best games ever. And why can I say that? Because I was in the swimming pool with the head of the Chinese team, who I knew from the games 4 years before. And he said, Beijing was good, but there's something really special here. And that's what he said. And somebody from Hungary said the same thing. He said, blimey, it feels like we're in Budapest here, but it's fantastic. They felt so much at home, and they were made to feel so much at home. So I think still, and I'm not being biased, because I've always never been biased when I've been in charge of an international organisation, but I think they were the best games ever. I think Paris were pretty fantastic, but I think the games that proved that we'd made a lot of progress since 2001 were Rio, because they were the people's games. The ordinary people couldn't afford to go and see the games in Rio. You had to be a millionaire to afford the tickets, near enough. And so I called the games in Rio the people's games, and 2 months before we were told there was no money for them. So we had to fix that. So he had loads of things to fix, but at the end of the day, it was a great success. And so, and I finished after that. So that was it.
Yeah, I think London, I think it was the crowds.
Yeah.
Every stadium was full. Wherever you went, it was packed, and they went to see sport. I thought Beijing was a good games too.
Yeah.
I think the start of it all, was Sydney. I think that was the start of it all, where the games really became the Paralympic Games.
Barcelona was the start of it, and then we fell flat in Atlanta, and then, I landed in Sydney, and I get a phone call, still in the flipping airport, and I can't remember her name, but she was the head. She was the, what do you call it, in the games from the organising committee side. She was like the president of the basketball. So she was president of basketball for the Olympics and for wheelchair. She said, we've got a problem. I said, what is it? She said, we'd planned it, that there would be just a day ticket for wheelchair basketball. But the demand is so great, we've got to now make it 3 sessions. I said, get on with it then. And she was, by the way, it wasn't that she wanted to do that, but the IOC has got such, they wouldn't agree just like that on the phone. Oh, we better think about that and think about this and all that. Whereas, let's go, and so it's just been a fantastic journey, and maybe I'm done as being president and all that and in charge, but I'm still involved in a little way. And
that's great. So obviously you said that we went flat in Atlanta. What do you think LA will be like?
I definitely don't think it'll be flat, and I think I met with, before I finished in 2017, I met with Casey, what's his second name? He's the president of the organising committee, Casey Kellerman or something like that. You'll have to look that up. And but I was with him presenting. He presented the medals to the US in Paris, and I presented the silvers. And he's got his head very much screwed on economically, like you would expect. But he wants a great games. I'm still so disappointed that there's only 8 men's teams and 8 women's teams.
So, I was going to actually come on to that, Phil.
Yeah.
Why is that? It feels like they're jealous of basketball and they're trying to cut us out of the games.
But what we can't understand is the World Championships has gone up to 16 teams.
Right.
But in the Paralympics, we've gone down to 8.
Well, all I'll say is that I brought this up at the last General Assembly of IPC, which was I think it was in Bahrain 2 years ago, or in 2023. And during questions about the annual report, I asked the question about this and to Andrew Parsons. And my first part of the question comment was that there'd been a letter to all international federations or to national Paralympic committees, I think. I'm not sure of this detail, but it doesn't matter really. You'll get the flow, the feeling, that all sports have been consulted before the decision was taken to make some cuts and make some increases in other sports. Then it transpires, and they've got to admit it, that this consultation never happened at all. But
really,
if that had happened when I was president, which it wouldn't have done, then it would have been. The changes couldn't have happened without the consultation taking place. But then I went on and the sports that have been hit are all the team sports. And I said, if there's anything that the world needs these days, and we've had more of that since then, that's 2 years ago, is teamwork, is different countries working together in teams. And team sport shows this. So who got really knocked? Wheelchair basketball the most, blind football, goalball, and I think that sitting volleyball and the only sport that didn't lose teams in their respective competitions was wheelchair rugby, because they had 8 anyway. So, but the IPC decided, in order to make way for more athletes in the newer sports, such as, I think as examples were, I think I could make the example of para taekwondo, para badminton, and 1 or 2 others, maybe only 2 others. We're all team sports. So anyway, I'd asked that question as to why. I hadn't really got a very good answer, but that was my question. And I'm a life member, so I'm allowed to speak. I'm only one of 2 life members. Bob Stedwood's the other, and of the IPC. And so then there's a couple more questions, not to do with that, but because it's all about the annual reporting, anything, be finance or anything. And then before the next questioner comes on, Andrew Parsons comes back and says, I just want to assure Sir Philip that the decisions taken that he has highlighted were not as a punishment of wheelchair basketball. Now, to me, if anybody feels that they've got to come in, and I never mentioned punishment at all in what I asked or what I commented on, and anybody that feels they've got to come back in because it seems as if IPC has punished not just IWBF, but I think he did mention wheelchair basketball specifically, then that makes me think, well, instead of doing what he wanted to do to allay any fears that punishment had happened, it probably makes you feel maybe the other way. So
It, do-
what?
it does to me, because the basketball in the Paralympics, you never see an empty seat. Never see an empty seat. It's the most popular sport. It's been voted around the world the most popular sport.
Right.
And now you're diluting it, because now, because of what they've done, we're not getting to see teams from around the world. If you look at Paris, what was there, 6 European teams out of 8?
Yeah. It's absolutely true.
What's happening to the African teams, the Asian teams? They're never going to get to the Paralympics now.
Yeah, South American ones, Central America.
Yeah, they're never going to get there.
I know that. And so, and if the IOC had tried that on with, well, they wouldn't try it on with basketball, for example, never would they? Because football's a big event because it's all over the country, and for the Olympics this is, and in multi-stadia, and people just want to go to the games and watch their favourite sport, football. But the sport that holds everything up, because it takes place throughout the games, like wheelchair basketball, is basketball. What an earner that is, for the games. It's massive, and it's the same for wheelchair basketball. And so economically, it's not right either. And but anyway, let's see if we can affect some change in the future. But it looks as if it won't be happening for LA. I mean, the thing to do during the same period, that maybe, how far should I go back? Well, let's go back just to Sydney in 2000, so 25 years ago. The IOC for the Olympics have increased the number of athletes significantly. I'm talking maybe 1,000, 1,500 since that time. IPC, I don't think, has had hardly any increases. But what should have happened was that the negotiations should have taken place with the IOC, because they had the last say in this. That was the contract when I was president. But surely it's reasonable that if there's a need for another, say, 300 athletes in the games, you can negotiate that. But you don't just chop certain sports. Yeah. So I'm not just talking wheelchair basketball now, the others that I've mentioned, the other team sports. Without any consultation, bang, is done. Of course, the other sports are very happy. They've got more athletes. They're relatively new sports. They're so happy with the IPC. But it's just not right. And that's where the negotiations should take place with the IOC. It shouldn't be at the loss to. So, I mean, the sport that absolutely amazes me, I know wheelchair basketball, I wouldn't say inside out anymore, but I used to. But it's blind football. It's an unbelievable.
Phil, that was my favourite sport to watch.
There's a Brazilian player there. I mean, how the hell does he do it?
I don't know. That was one of my favourite. If I was watching the games, when I was in the games, I'd definitely have to go and watch the blind football, because I don't even know how they do it. And they were... Yeah, amazing. It's an unbelievable team sport. Unbelievable.
Yeah, unbelievable. So, and anyway, that's how I feel about that. And I'm not saying any more at the moment, but I think you know how I feel.
We definitely do. We definitely do. So, one that we want to go way back. When you got banned with Jerry.
Oh, yes.
That's a great story we'd like to hear. How did that all come about? Because that's why we're called delinquents, because we're close to what you were.
Well, I am. I'm one of them. I'm banned.
Not as militant.
Yeah, you're not as militant.
Of course we're not. Me and John, no.
I am. I am, Phil.
Okay, anyway. I never viewed us as being delinquent in what we did. But, okay, I'll tell you the story. So, this goes back to 1976 and the National Games at Stoke Mandeville. And I'd been a swimmer, pretty good breaststroker. I'd dead heated with the Paralympic champion, Billy Thornton, I think, in the 73. That was it. The 73 national games. And was it 74? 74 maybe. I think it was 74 because we'd come back after winning the European Wheelchair Basketball Championships in Kerpap. And Sir Ludwig Gutmann had pulled out a bottle of champagne. And so we'd celebrated that. And then I'd gone in the final. I must have been supercharged on champagne. And so I dead eated with Billy Thornton. But then we got to the international games and 3 polios came into class 3 of swimming. I mean, my legs from the knee down, they acted like flipping anchors when I was swimming. And whereas polio legs just floated on the surface, dead lightweight. And I think they broke the world record, 3 of them, by 5 seconds. Well, the world record was only 60 seconds. So again, you know, thinking classification, there's something. Anyway, I packed swimming up immediately. So we got to 76, but Jocelyn and myself were watching the swimming one night. And it comes to an end, and the crowds leave. There wasn't a lot of spectator seating, but they leave, and the place goes pretty empty. But there in the pool alongside was Cliff Last, and he was the team manager for the whole of the Paralympic team going to Canada for the Paralympics in 76. So he comes up to me and starts talking. He said, Phil, yeah, of course, you know, we're making progress with the team because we're consulting with the athletes on who I don't think he would use the word carers, but who the the medical team should be to accompany the team out to, and the different sports out to Canada. But he said, of course, I'm the one still selecting the coaches. So I started to speak, and after I've been speaking for about a minute, Jocelyn said, you're getting louder and louder. I nearly blew him into the pool with my voice because I said, you might think it's okay. But I said, we've got a basketball coach who looks in an AB training manual and then tries to put that up on the blackboard at RAF Stafford where we were training. And I said, he doesn't know the first thing about our sport.
A bit like now.
A lot like now.
And I said, we've got a swimming coach that was found in Heidelberg 4 years before to be out shopping in the town when there were finals on with British swimmers in. So anyway, that concluded. And unbeknownst to me, because this would be about the Thursday maybe of the week down at Stoke Mandeville, and Jerry had said, we hadn't planned this, had said something exactly the same, right? And about the same subject, not exactly the same. So the following morning, we're arraigned what I call before the Star Chamber. That used to be something, I think, in the time of Henry VIII. And if you went before the Star Chamber, you're only going one way down the pan after that. And so you had Gutmann there. You had John Scruton, his secretary. Then you had Cliff Last. And then you had the 2 coaches. So, and Jerry had been, he wasn't in with me, but he'd been spoken to the same, I think, either slightly, maybe the day before or the day after, don't know. So then Gutmann says to me, he says, well, what have you got to say for yourself, Craven? So I started with the basketball coach, repeated to him what I'd said to Cliff Last. I got to the swimming coach, said the same thing again. And before I could get to Cliff Last, Gutmann interrupts and says, as president of this and whatever of that, this is your final warning. And you might be one of the best players in the world, but you will not be going on the plane to Canada. And he'd said the same thing to Jerry. Anyway, we stay at Mick McCready's and Jane Blackburn's because it's near Gatwick Airport. We were flying from there, and we've got Jerry on the floor because he was a polio hero, and me and Vince in a double bed. But what I didn't know was that Vince snores like bloody hell, and so I didn't get any sleep. We got onto the plane, and we'd been isolated, the two of us, from the basketball team. And I was sat next to a guy called Ian Cathcart, which he was the armourer for the fencing team, you know. And I said to Jerry, well, let's just have a couple of beers and forget this and get there. Then we get there, and it's in a big university campus in Mississauga, it's called, in Toronto. Good accommodation and all that. But the coach hadn't organised any training. It wasn't like it's done now at the Paralympics, you know, it's all set up beforehand and all this. So it's Jerry and me that go along and get it fixed up with the caretaker of the gym on the campus. And so we've arranged it all. Coach comes along, gives us the usual training session. We don't do very well in the competition. I think we ended up 7th or 8th. We had a tie, which supposedly in basketball rules in '76 was possible with Spain, which I never understood because I didn't think you could have a tie in basketball. And but I was fomenting revolution, you know, in between the matches, and we agreed as a team to do a round robin letter, so everybody signs it, complaining about the coach and how he had no idea. I won't mention his name. And so, and that'd be August, maybe late August, because I know that the great drought of '76 was still on when we got back. It had been raining every day in blinking Canada. So we got back then, end of August maybe, 1976. Didn't hear a thing about the international team, neither of us, me and Jerry. So then we got our club chairman, I think it was Dr. Krishna, or Dr. Silva maybe, Dr. Krishna, I think. And he wrote to Gutman, who wrote a 3-page letter back, and the basis of it was we're banned for life until we learn to play with the other players on the team. That was the sort of way it was excused. Anyway, then after 77, at 77 at the National Games, we decided to take on the English Paraplegic Sports Association, EPSA, because we'd heard that a snooker player called Mick Shelton, who was Paralympic champion at the time, had been banned from competing for Lodgemore Club. But the chairman of Lodgemore Club was a guy called Jeff Aiscoff. And he was also chairman with Gutman as president of the EPSA. And he tried to extend his ban so that Mick Shelton couldn't play for any para sports club in the whole of Britain. And so we took him to task. And he was not re-elected as chairman of the EPSA. Gutman wasn't in the meeting, by the way. Who just was elected chairman.
You?
Was me. So, which I didn't have much time for this organisation, but that was the start. And so many people who'd been in that meeting came out. Are you two lawyers or what? We had Jeff Aiscoff banged to rights, and it didn't pass. And I don't know how he went on at Lodgemore, but I think he moved clubs and was still competing in snooker. But that's how it kicked off. And that's when, and then in 78, I think at the Europeans, you'd have to look up the record, but we went from being European champions in 74 and third in the world in 75, and then 76 we didn't do very well. But in 77 in Europe, I think we ended up 9th. And we both got letters from the new coach, what was he called? Glyn Taylor, inviting us to come back to play. because the GB team weren't very strong. Anyway, of course, I discussed it with the boss, Jocelyn, and I thought better to reform from the inside than just by staying on the outside. And but Jerry never did, and he wouldn't do. And so that was 78. And he said, I won't come back and play for GB until I have an apology from Sir Ludwig Gutmann. So Sir Ludwig Gutmann died, I think, in 79 or definitely 80, early 80, before the Paralympics in Arnhem in 1980. And Jerry never got an apology, and Jerry never played again for Great Britain. It was one of the greatest losses you could ever believe. He scored 36 points at the Commonwealth Paralympic Games in Dunedin. I didn't go because I wasn't allowed to go by my employer in France, and I was in love with Jocelyn anyway, so I never went on that trip. But he scored 36 points, Jerry, and battered Australia in the final. Now, you've got to take that two ways, because there was a really dirty player for Australia called Mather Brown. And what's he called? Our centre, the only centre we had, Cyril Thomas from Lodgemore, laid him out with a right hook, I think. So in the final, Mather Brown got carried off and Cyril got sent off. So I've been told. I didn't see it, and there were no films of that, I don't think. But yeah, so very eventful times, and that's how it started. But I just couldn't stand it when things were wrong, and they had to be put right for the sake of the game. Well, primarily for the sake of the players.
That's our view. That's our view exactly. For the sake of the game.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That has been absolutely brilliant to talk to you, Phil. We'll finish on that last story because that was a wonderful story. Absolutely amazing story. It's been great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you.
One of our Hall of Fame, original Hall of Famers in our Hall of Fame.
Our first Hall of Famer.
Our first Hall of, you're the number one in our Hall of Fame.
All right. Well, you
look after yourself.
Well, we will do. And I just want this heat's going away tomorrow, supposedly, a little bit. It's the humidity that's doing it, I think. But anyway, it's absolute pleasure for me. And just keep your tempers tight and just keep writing the very persuasive letters. One of my first letters that I ever did was to, what was he called? He was a doctor, American doctor at Stoke Mandeville, Kirby McCann. He was like their president of classification on all sports, an expert supposedly. Anyway, I wrote him this letter explaining why in wheelchair basketball, I didn't bother about the other sports, things were wrong and they needed changing. So I don't even know if I got a reply, but I saw him at the international games a few months later. He'd had a few drinks in the big tent there, and he said, my God, he said, you can't write letters. He didn't say anything else though. So I never got an answer to my question about things have to change. And it took another 6 to 8 years to start the change going forward, but yeah, writing letters is a very, very, very strong, or emails as they are now, very strong way of getting your facts down on paper or on the internet,
We're good at that, Phil.
We're very good at that. Thank you. We will continue what we're doing.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
See you.
Take care. This has been the Delinquent Show with Phil Craven.